Welcome to the 21st episode of Experts Dispatch. On this episode, we have with us Iftikhar Firdous to discuss the current situation regarding militancy and terrorism in Pakistan. Iftikhar Firdous is a renowned journalist and is widely considered one of the most knowledgeable persons when it comes to the issue of militancy and terrorism in Pakistan and Afghanistan. He is the founding editor of the Khorasan Diary, a digital platform which focuses on the importance of the greater Khorasan region in terms of geopolitical, strategic, and security alliances. Mr. Firdaus holds a PhD in Psychological Linguistics from the University of Chicago. Mr. Firdaus, welcome to our Experts Dispatch.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Looking forward to have a valuable interaction.
Let's move on to the first question. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is by far the largest terrorist organization operating in Pakistan and has been undertaking attacks since its formal inception in 2007. How is the TTP of today different from the TTP of the past, specifically from the time period before Zarbazab, the last large-scale military operation? How have they evolved their activities over time since they have lost their safe havens in Pakistan?
So, when we look at the TTP as an organization, we actually divide it into three different spectrums, depending on how they've actually changed their operation, particularly after Zarb-e-Azab and as well as more formatively after August 21. But if you look at when the TTP actually started changing its tactics and how they've actually developed into an organization, a banned militant outfit that is now considered to be almost a semi-insurgency within Pakistan, we see that happening in 2018. Before that, the TTP can be considered to be a ragtag tribal militia, which has had support from Al Qaeda as well as the Afghan Taliban and other scattered elements from banned organizations like the Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, as well as other terrorist outfits within Pakistan of smaller scale. But in 2018, we see that the TTP actually goes back to its original charter. Now, to understand the background of this, one has to know that what was the formative role of the TTP when it actually came into formation in 2007. If you look at the documents in terms of the original charter of the TTP, in 2007, the TTP was actually carved by Al Qaeda, two Lebanese in particular, who came down to Waziristan and tried to form a militia that actually replicated the Afghan Taliban. And the entire charter is very long, but obviously it had contours of not just being an organization that's limited to Pakistan, but that would have transfrontier, influences as well. So one can consider one hypothesis from that charter is that actually the TTP was built up by the Afghan Taliban and Al Qaeda as an evasive movement to keep the Americans entangled within Pakistan so that they could be distracted from Afghanistan. And then, if you actually look at it from another perspective, you can actually look at the TTP as being an organization in which the Afghan Taliban and Al Qaeda tried to exercise its influence within Pakistan. However, when the TTP began, so it started deviating from its original charter. And while it had begun from the tribal areas, it had enjoyed much of the relationship between urban militant outfits as well, particularly of the sectarian nature. Now, at that time, deviation from the charter resulted in somewhat condemnation from Al Qaeda as well as, the Afghan Taliban who tried to distance itself. And that depends on how many chiefs or emirs the Tehreek-e-Taliban had because it had different policies at different times. Baitullah had a very different policy, Hakimullah very different, and then ultimately Fazlullah. But if you go into the details of it, these divisions within the ranks of the TTP are not just based on its operational action, but also based on creed in terms of what lines of religious creed they were following. Simultaneously, also, it's also the financial model that they were following. Because if you look at the original charter of the TTP, one of the most described part of it is on how the group will generate, economic capacities to sustain itself. And within that, you clearly see the markers of a sectarian organization in which other sects, in particularly Shias, in particular, Ahmadis, as well
Yeah.
as other minorities were also a target. So when you look at the trajectory of the attacks of the TTP from 2007 onwards, when it first came into being, a lot of people believe that it was actually the Lal Masjid operation that resulted in the formation of the TTP, but that is not correct. The Lal Masjid just seems to be a catalyst for various militant organizations to combine together. The idea of the TTP had been floated around within jihadist spheres much before that, immediately after 2001 when the Americans entered Afghanistan. And so those attacks after 2007, you must have seen that they went and attacked, Data Ganj Bakhsh Mazar, as well as,
Yes.
you know, mosques from the Ahmadiyya movement, and also, intersectarian and minority attacks, as well as against Sikhs, as well as Hindus, as well as Christians within Pakistan. And somewhat the realignment of the militant organization did not go well with its international jihadist cohorts as well. And then we see that, when subsequent amirs took a hold of TTP, they had various differences with the Afghan Taliban's and Al Qaeda, and somehow when the APS attack took place, despite the fact that Fazlullah was the Amir of the TTP who wholeheartedly supported that attack. We saw factions of the TTP itself as well as Al Qaeda and Afghan Taliban distancing itself from that particular thing. And
Yeah.
then there was, a phase between 2014 and 2017, in which there were various meetings that were held, and it would take a lot of time to actually explain these 3 years, because that is where the organization goes into the transformational phase that it is. But when Fazlullah was killed in a drone strike in Afghanistan, uh, the somehow the TTP always thought that the the Masood Taliban were the ones that were actually responsible for leading the organization. And then it comes back to this person that is known as, Nur Wali Masood now,
Wali
who is.
Masood.
So in 2018, we see the republication of certain charters of the TTP, and so the original Arabic, charter that was carved by Al Qaeda was then translated into Urdu with some exceptions, and so they removed minorities out of it, they removed
Okay.
sects out of it. um, they did keep NGOs and INGOs as a target list, but not entirely, and they distanced themselves from any NGOs that were working in the health and education sector. As well as that financial model of theirs, them was completely altered. But what we see as a major development of the TTP in terms of what we can call a semi success of the organization in terms of expanding itself, it actually morphed into an organization in which they only started targeting the Pakistan military and its allies.
Yes.
And so that corresponds to a time period within Pakistan where the role of the military in terms of its political part has been questionable by the public at large. And somehow the TTP has sensed that. And while we believe that in 2021 is what the TTP actually became on what it is right now, again, 2021 was a catalyst. And after, the political processes in Pakistan and the economic model of the country failing till quite an extent, in which it still tried to grapple with larger realities, the TTP has used uh, local conflicts to its benefit in recruiting, in exploiting, and somehow, with the help of Al Qaeda and other scattered elements, it's managed to create an operational model uh, which for itself is operationally successful. Let me find the exact words on how to explain it, because this is the part which actually explains on what happened to it. While the TTP's operations are a reality, but and the number of casualties, number of attacks that have been carried out in 2023 are larger in number than the years 2009. But the impact of those attacks is not to the extent on what it was in 2009, which shows that the Pakistani state has managed to curtail it, has had the elements to grapple with it, and has learned from experience in countering the counterterrorism model. But what the TTP has an extension now is, it has these digital elements in which they have at least 12 different digital assets through which they try to reach out to the public. And so the GDP of 2024 seems to be much larger than what it was in 2009, despite the fact that 2009 was more deadlier in terms of its
Mm.
carnage. And I think that has a lot to do with the digital sphere. It also has to do a lot of discontent in terms of the political sphere within Pakistan. And the TTP does not only now have a relative influence in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but from 2018 onwards, it started producing Baloch content as well. And they announced two wilayas in Balochistan, which
Yes.
had not been that successful, but somehow, there have been instances in which they have managed to carry out large scale attacks in Balochistan as well and try to garner the support of the Baloch separatists. Whether those linkages exist in reality or they don't exist, or how successful those have been, those are questionable, and that requires a very different discussion. But some of the reasons that the TTP somehow seems to be a larger monster at this time than rather in 2009 is actually the discontent within Pakistan and the lack of clarity on how to tackle TTP, whether it should be politically handled, whether it is just a counterterrorism problem, or whether it is an extremism problem within society at large. These are three different ways of looking at it. And I think all three are relevant in some capacity. But the way that the state is handling it, while the DTP has modified itself in how it operates, the state somehow seems to be confused on how to counter DTP. And I think that's where the larger problem lies.
I've also noticed in my research that the number of attacks in the past year, year and a half have grown, but the number of casualties or injuries we sustained from that has gone down, as
Mm,
compared to, for example, like you mentioned, 2009.
mm, mm,
Moving on to the second question, traditionally a large portion of the terrorist attacks have been carried out in KP and Balochistan, while Punjab and Sindh have had a much lower number of attacks.
mm.
But this year, yeah, I think it was in the first quarter of this year, we saw a string of attacks in Punjab, which were claimed by the TTP and which were mainly against law enforcement agencies. What could be the aim for undertaking such attacks in Punjab? Could it be a revival of the Punjabi Taliban?
There is a revival of the Punjabi Taliban. Depends on what you consider to be the Punjabi Taliban. Um, but there are obviously the TDP announced that it has a wilaya in the south of Punjab and scattered Tashkils also in different ways. Tashkils actually make up a number of militants, somewhere between 10 to 25. But if you look at the trajectory of attacks, I think that it is mostly concentrated in areas that are on the boundary with the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So
South KP in specific.
the south of KP, particular, which has seen the larger attacks within Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well. If I'm statistically correct, and I remember, like 63% of the total attacks since 2021 have been concentrated in the south of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And obviously, Miyawali is one of the places where those attacks have taken place. We've seen scattered target killings taking place in Bakar, as well as DG Khan. Last month, in the last 2 months, we've seen two attacks claimed in Karachi as well by the TTP,
Yes.
um, which is obviously alarming till quite an extent. Because obviously, when it starts seeping into Karachi, then that means that the group actually has grown tentacles into those areas. But we've seen an equal number of operations by the security forces as well against such groups. And on daily basis, we do see that there are casualties from the militant side as well, and the numbers dwindling down. But we don't see, an impact of those counterterrorism operations. It looks like there are people that are coming in, they are killed, the networks are being abolished, and then they rebuild within a month's time. And I think that has a lot to do when the Pakistani state starts blaming Afghanistan, but simultaneously also, there is a presence of TTP in urban Pakistan as well, which is obviously aiding these numbers. And there is a supply network that exists that can provide weapons as well as facilitation. Because when attacks start taking place in urban areas, that means that there is an urban presence of militants. So that cannot be denied. But in Punjab, we see a dangerous trajectory in which the TTP has now stopped claiming responsibilities overall. This February, they have stopped claiming responsibilities officially for any attacks in February of 2024. And so the statements that are coming in are largely political statements. So the TDP now has a statement on floods, on economy, or any other instance that is important for the social fabric of Pakistan. They have an issue of complaining about that. What is unfortunate is that the TTP's narrative actually exploits and rings the same chord as the society at large. So they're exploiting those lines while simultaneously trying to build their propaganda network to influence those people that we are your voice as well. And I think that's a more dangerous trend than just acting against a terrorist network. I think that what they're trying to build now is an extension of themselves in within the social milieu of Pakistan. And that does not only require a counterterrorism policy in which only kinetics matters. You cannot just do that with the CTD or with the ISI or the MI or the IB. You need actual social institutions to counter that. That would mean your schools, your colleges, your education system, your curriculum, as well as your civil society at large. But then when we look at it from another perspective, all these institutions are also simultaneously under attack from the state itself, and civil society itself is at loggerheads with the state. So that confusion somewhat creates that ripe elements in which the narratives of TTP, they still manage to maneuver in one way or another.
I think last week or the week before that, they also put out a communique regarding deforestation and how climate change is troublesome for Pakistan.
That's
Uh,
actually the second statement that they've given on this, because there have been, certain local statements that their local groups have been asking people in Waziristan as well as in the south of KP, Lagi Marwat, not to cut down forests.
all right.
And although the garb might be in terms of climate change and other effects, but obviously these forests have always served as a passageway for them, as their eco hub as well, on where their movements can be safe, in which they can actually take resort in during the daytime where they cannot be spotted. So that is also one of the reasons.
Uh, 2 months back, the federal government announced an operation called Azmi Istikam after a meeting of the Central Apex Committee to re-energize the country's counterterrorism effort. The DGISPR in a recent press conference reiterated the resolve of the military that this operation will be carried out at all costs. Could you shed some light on the operation? Is it different from past initiatives by the state to curb terrorism, and how will the state take on the terror crime nexus which the DG ISPR referred to in his press conference?
I think the DG and the Prime Minister's office, sorry, have clarified the statement that they didn't mean any kinetic operation. They've
Yes.
clarified that multiple times. But what it actually means, and I'll repeat it, I've repeated this several times, is that the Apex Committee was actually taking a toll on, the National Action Plan. So the National Action Plan was this huge list of 21 different sectors, which all the stakeholders thought after the APS attack in
Yes.
2014 that these were the places which we need to invest in uh, so that terrorism can be curtailed. By 2021, there was a revised national action plan because there was no consensus on the 21. So it was reduced to 14 points.
14. Yes.
So what the Apex committee was doing is they asked the Interior Ministry to give them an update on where were we with those 14 points. And when they looked at it, they saw little to no progress on that front. And that is what they termed as Azma as they come, that this is the place where we need to sort of reinvest in. And so let's reinvigorate our strategy by calling it an operation or resolve. I mean, the semantics of it is very so. But when you add the term operation, it actually has a more pragmatical value for displaced communities or communities that have previously suffered at the hands of terrorism and operations simultaneously. And so
Yes.
they thought that it's probably going to be one of the those kind of operations where they're going to be displaced, and it's resulted in this entire episteme of discourses in which they have been saying that no, we will not allow that, despite the fact that whatever the National Action Plan has suggested is still in action. So it's not like it's stopped. And they, even since then, there have been a number of intelligence-based operations in different places of KP as well as Balochistan, even in Sindh and even in Punjab. But
Yes.
somehow, as we've talked about it in in the answer to the first question, that the political milieu of Pakistan is so distorted at this time that a singular or unilateral narrative is not there against terrorism, and somehow, so whatever you suggest to resolve the problem of terrorism will also be a political question, and there can be no unilateral answer to it. And so, whenever there will be a counterterrorism measure that will be adopted, there'll be different viewpoints. Some of it based on antagonism, some of them based on pragmatic, solutions in terms of what people think and what the state thinks, and then the third part of it will be always that people will think that, like in the past, where counterterrorism measures have been used to suppress civil liberties, uh, this is what will happen. So that trust between the state and its citizens is somewhat evaporated, and that therefore we see this reaction from society.
Mr. Firdaus, where do you see the Pakistan-Afghan relations presently? Pakistan has on numerous times stated that Afghanistan has been used for the planning of and facilitation of attacks inside Pakistan. Other players in the region like China and Russia and India have started warming up to the Afghans as compared to us. How will Pakistan maintain its relationship with Afghanistan after the repeated uh, inaction regarding the TTP?
So Pakistan's stance vis-a-vis the Afghan Taliban since the takeover of Kabul has somewhat not been static itself. There's been an unwavering support to a total loss of support. When you talk about China and Russia, these are two countries that never had the kind of relationship that they now have with Afghanistan or the Taliban. Let's talk about the Taliban, not with Afghanistan. They've never had that kind of support like they have now. So when you don't have anything and you try to build something in you, for anything that you gain is always considered to be something that is to your advantage. While Pakistan had a very good relationship with the Afghan Taliban, and obviously there have been statements by the military as well as the political leadership of Pakistan to support that, that they actually enjoy a very good relationship with the Taliban. Why did those relationships go down? I think the TTP is just the symptom of a larger problem that exists between both the countries. Um, the economic ties as well as the expectations of Pakistan on what the Afghan Taliban would be when they come to rule Afghanistan is somehow considered to be a very massive miscalculation by a country. And when you speak to the Afghan Taliban, for them, they say that Pakistan treats us as their fifth province. It does not give us the respect that is required, and it does not deal with us like a country, but rather, a subsidiary of theirs. Now, these are statements coming directly from Afghanistan. And so when you build a policy that is disliked by a country, you start building your policy around that framework. And that means that there is substantial mishandling of your foreign policy towards the country. But we're looking at it from a very Pakistani perspective. When you, from a very Afghan perspective, when you look at it from the Pakistani perspective, obviously you cannot have um, a 2,800 kilometers border with a country and think of it as a friendly country, and while simultaneously also there is a full-blown insurgency that is supported from that country within your country.
Mm,
And so when you look at it from this perspective, then the TTP remains one of the major spoilers in this larger zero-sum game, which is zero-sum for now because we don't see any immediate solution for it right now. And I think for an immediate solution, there are no immediate solutions to this problem. It is now, it is not just purely a counterterrorism issue, it is a larger political issue at hand. Because Afghanistan, in terms of its global connections, is very well connected in, even now, despite the fact of lesser interest within the international community because of the Doha peace process.
yes.
And so one of the problems with Afghanistan that Pakistan has is Pakistan's own legitimate stance against Afghanistan and the TTP of not being able to gather the foreign support that it requires. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that the country, our country, has sort of acted previously during the last 20 years. And also, when you keep on switching your stances from peace talks to full-blown counter-terrorism operations, then people don't take you seriously because they think that you are open to and susceptible to various different orders trying to manipulate at different times at a different point in time, you know. So when people don't take you seriously, then they will not have serious solutions as well. I think as well the Afghan problem of Pakistan's Afghan problem is not just external; it is internal as well, because a lot of people have a different viewpoints on how you should tackle how you should tackle Afghanistan, and I think that what needs to be done is in terms of solutions, there needs to be a short-term strategy, then medium and long-term strategy. I think that one of the basic flaws that we have is the ad hoc measures that we have adopted on our borders. I think those will no longer work.
All right. Moving on to the last question. Uh, DGISPR in the press conference we just mentioned before, he also referred to digital terrorism. What's your understanding of the term coming from a background of linguistics, especially given the political and security situation in the country? Additionally, how active are TTP, IS, and other groups on the internet? Do they only undertake propaganda, or are they actually looking for new members?
I think when we talk about digital terrorism in reference to the DGISPR's press conference, it has had a certain history attached to it. Uh, Not long ago, there was a term that was also used, which was known as fifth generation warfare. And it was quite
Yes.
often used within Pakistani security, domains discourse. And I think that has more, you come back to the same question on who do you consider to be a terrorist. If it's against TTP and ISKP and other organizations, I think Pakistanis in general would not react to it the way that there is a reaction and a public discourse about it right now. But the way that terrorism laws have been used previously in
Mm,
Pakistan, or rather abused in different ways against political
yes.
leadership, against dissenting voices, or people probably who have a different opinion altogether. I think that that is what it encapsulates to. So, for any suggestions or any practical measures that the state is trying to adopt under the connotation of digital terrorism, it needs to be very clear on what they actually believe to be terrorism. Um, but then again, the internet is a frontier which is difficult to control, despite the fact that there might be several crackdowns. For example, Twitter is currently, or X is banned in Pakistan.
Yes.
We've seen the UK government, yesterday tackling with the same issue, with X not taking down content about the riots in England. You know, this morning they have actually Their MPs have been giving statements that the police will be arresting people who have retweeted hate content, which the state considers to be hate. So I don't think that this is only a problem that's now, going to be limited to Pakistan. It's going to be a global problem because the more you shift towards the more our lives are oriented by the virtual space. While the state previously had adopted the same measures in our lives which were out of the virtual space, like in real life, and the more you move towards virtual life, the same kind of mechanisms will now be applied to that as well. So I think it's only a matter of time that this was supposed to happen. But I do believe that the state right currently is in a mood to actually clamp down upon more digital rights, on what you consider to be rights, or probably as what we consider to be our privileges for the time being. It's only a matter of time that we start losing more space to the state on the internet. It's just about time.
Thank you, Mr. Firdos, for your time. It was a pleasure having you.
Anytime, anytime. Thank you very much. Thank you, Zulfikar.
Thank you.